First, as always, a look at global energy commodities markets. And of course, this week, the big driver is, of course, the crisis in the Middle East with the conflict between Israel and Hamas. And look at what has happened to Brent. Brent is up to $93 a barrel, a tightening there. Well, markets are anticipating a lot more conflict and contagion within the Middle East region, particularly if Israel's threat to send ground troops to Gaza does materialize. That could send prices close to $100 per barrel mark. The same drivers being mirrored in the North American market. WTI up 88 bips. Natural gas, not so much. It was down by 1.83%, but RBOB gasoline up also by 1%. Let's look at what's happening in the Nigerian stock markets. Well, the all-share index on the Nigeria Stock Exchange closed down by 27 basis points to end the week on Friday at 66,915.41. A modest, fairly good amount of deals. That's about $8 million or so, 6.3 billion naira. And of course, the market capitalization closing, as usual, around the 36.76 trillion mark. Now, in Europe and North America, European markets closed down. Wow. Interesting here because yields, bond yields, particularly US treasuries, I'll talk about that later, are high around the world. Concerns around rising interest rates and what these banks, the central banks, might do with inflation. But you can see concerns in markets globally around geopolitical risks, inflation, macroeconomic issues. So all the major indices in Europe were down as at Friday. The biggest move there happened in Germany. The DAX was down by 1.64%. Of course, concerns there in Germany around consumer demand. FTSE All-Share Index in London also down by 1.30%. Let's take a look at Wall Street as of Friday, October 20. It's pretty much the same picture here, all red. Dow Industrial Index, S&P, and NASDAQ Composite Index all down by 45 bips, 81 bips, and 1.14%. And I'll talk a bit more about US Treasuries because I'm going to go now to my business top picks for the week. The first story here is that US government treasuries are at an all-time 16-year high. They climbed to 5%, a level we've not seen since the global financial crisis. There's been a major sell-off in global bond markets, concerns around inflation rates, inflation targeting by the Fed and other central banks. So we see yields for 10-year and 30-year treasuries in the US go up to 4.91% and 5% respectively. There's been a major sell-off in markets, concerns around geopolitical risk, and of course, inflation. Of course, we know that there's an inverse correlation between the price of bonds and the yields of bonds. So prices of bonds have been falling, which means yields have been going through the roof, and that's affecting global stock markets, of course, as well as we saw with that bearish outlook earlier in the US and the European markets. What else is happening around the world? China's Jinping is committing to more investments in Nigeria. This was on the back of the Belt and Road Initiative. Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima did visit to attend that particular forum. There was about $6 billion worth of deals struck between the Nigeria Space and Engineering National Agency and the Chinese as well, about $2 billion worth of investments. These investments are going to cover everything from utilities, clean energy. The Chinese Harbor and Engineering Company also apparently signed an MOU for the construction of the Lagos Blue deep sea port. Whether these deals will materialize remains to be seen. Of course, many other deals, such deals, headline marquee deals signed between the Chinese government and Nigeria, still remain at ideation phase. So there will be cautious optimism as to whether this will materialize. Does this mark a new phase in the Chinese investment relationship with Nigeria? Well, perhaps not so much, but what we want to see is an implementation of these infrastructure deal announcements that we've been seeing for decades. Perhaps a turning point. We'll be monitoring that more closely. Tunisia's president has sacked the Minister for the Economy over a statement about the IMF. Now, the country has a $1.9 billion loan package that is currently on hold because Tunisia has not fulfilled all the requirements for accessing that disbursement. And the now former finance minister, economy minister, Sami Said, did say that the country needs to move to meet those requirements. But Tunisia's president, who is also called Said, no relation between the two, has said that that deal would impoverish Tunisians and called it, and I quote, a foreign diktat. That's what he called the IMF deal, Will that deal see the light of day now that a huge advocate of that deal is gone? We shall see. But Tunisia facing serious economic challenges which have continued since the Arab Spring of 2011. In the EU is asking Meta and TikTok, two social media platforms, to provide information around incitement of violence and allegations of inciting terrorism or pushing or encouraging sort of violent activity online. And now this particular regulation comes under the Digital Services Act of the EU. So Meta and TikTok are going to be required to provide and disclose more information to regulators under that act. Iran finally is calling for an oil embargo on Israel. Now, this is interesting because if you think back to the Arab-Israeli conflict of the 1950s, there was a huge oil embargo that caused oil prices to shoot through the roof. Could this be a driver for Brent going through the roof as well? Yet to be seen. Israel imports most of its crude oil from Kazakhstan and not from many of the Middle Eastern countries in any case. So whether this call by Iran for an oil embargo will have any major impact remains to be seen. Of course, Iran is now being drawn into this conflict with accusations flying on all sides that it was responsible for the initial and worked with Hamas for the initial strike on Israel on October 7. So geopolitics there been mingled with global oil markets. Oil markets already, as we saw, Brent at $93 a barrel. So might we see further spikes in the price? Well, we'll be looking at that next week on Business Week. And now for some other top stories from around the world. The US will take steps to prevent American chip makers from selling products to China that circumvent government restrictions as part of the Biden administration's upcoming actions to effectively block more AI chip exports. The new rules, revealed during the week, will be added to sweeping US restrictions on shipments of advanced chips and chip-making equipment to China unveiled last October. Google plans to manufacture its flagship Pixel 8 smartphone in India, joining a growing list of global tech companies limiting their supply chain's dependence on China. The announcement follows US tech rival Apple's release last month of its latest iPhone, including units made in India, as tech giants target the South Asian nation's fast expanding market and abundant supply of cheap skilled labor. Well, Tuesday was the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, celebrated annually to promote understanding and dialogue between people living in poverty and the wider society. According to the UN, 8.4% of the world's population, or as many as 670 million people, were living in extreme poverty at the end of 2022. An estimated 7% of the global population, around 575 million people, could still find themselves trapped in extreme poverty by 2030. That's not so far away. According to the IMF's World Economic Outlook, South Africa's economy will momentarily surpass Nigeria's as the continent's largest in 2024. Now, South Africa's GDP will reach $401 billion by 2024 at current prices. This will be higher than Egypt's $358 billion and Nigeria's $395 billion. According to the analysis, South Africa, the continent's most industrialized country, will only hold the top spot for a year before reversing to second place behind Nigeria and then Egypt by 2026. On a sad note, former economist and accountant Olabode Augusto, founder of Augusto & Co. Limited, Nigeria's first credit rating company, died at 58 years old on Thursday. Bode Augusto established Nigeria's leading credit rating agency. After its inception in 1992, Augusto & Co. ventured into credit ratings and became the very first licensed by the Securities and Exchanges Commission in 2003. Former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo awarded Augusto the national honor of Member of the Order of the Federal Republic for his contributions to the economy. He was then appointed as the DG and Special Advisor to the President on budget matters. During his 4 years as DG of the budget, Nigeria ran budget surpluses every year and built savings that enabled the country to obtain debt relief and repay $32 billion of the national debt. He passed on in Portugal in the early hours of Thursday after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. He's survived by his wife, children, and grandchildren. May his soul rest in peace. Nigeria's inflation rate has experienced a spike for a 9th straight month in September on rising transportation and food prices. Consumer prices rose 26.7% year-on-year compared to 25.8% in August, according to data released by the National Bureau of Statistics during the week. Food inflation is now as high as 30.6%. And finally, Rolls-Royce Holdings is preparing to cut about 2,500 jobs as part of a major overhaul of the aerospace and defense company by its new chief executive officer. The overhaul is aimed at streamlining operations and cutting costs in the company. The cuts are likely to fall across Rolls-Royce's global workforce of 42,000 and represent a reduction of almost 6%.